So I want you to, close your eyes for just a second.
Okay.
Just picture this exact scene in your mind. It's the dead of night, right? And the sky over the Middle East is suddenly illuminated by the streak of a missile.
Right.
And then there's this deep, concussive thud of a strike hitting a massive power grid. Alarms start blaring. It's just total terrifying chaos.
It's a heavy image.
It is. But now I want you to pan the camera of your mind thousands of miles to the east, all the way to Pakistan.
Okay, quite a jump.
Yeah. You're standing inside this massive floodlit cricket stadium, but instead of the roar of a crowd, there is just this eerie, echoing silence. The stadium is entirely empty except for the crack of a bat hitting a ball.
That's such a surreal contrast.
Exactly. And now, cut from there to New Delhi. The sun is literally just coming up, but an emergency cabinet meeting is already in full swing. The faces around the table are grim, the binders are thick, the tension is just palpable in the room.
High stakes.
Huge stakes. And finally, bring that camera all the way down to a small, bustling street corner in Maharashtra. The morning rush is starting, but a local restaurant owner is just staring blankly at his stove, realizing he suddenly has absolutely no fuel to cook the day's food.
Wow.
And his entire livelihood might be paralyzed by sunset.
I mean, it feels incredibly cinematic when you lay it out like that. It has the pacing of like a geopolitical thriller movie.
Right.
Yeah, the kind of movie where the director gives you this sprawling opening montage just to prove that every single character, no matter how distant they seem, is caught in the exact same invisible web.
But the truly staggering part here is that this isn't a movie. This is the exact reality of the global news landscape we are waking up to today.
It really is.
So welcome to the deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us. Today's mission is to decode the ultimate butterfly effect.
And we have an enormous stack of sources in front of us today. I mean, from diplomatic cables and financial reports to local news dispatches, even parliamentary drafts.
Yeah, it's a lot. And what we're going to do is trace the shockwaves of global geopolitics straight into the local, everyday realities of India.
We're going to explore how international military crises, deep-seated political legacies, and some genuinely futuristic technologies are all just violently colliding right now in our immediate present.
It's a fascinating, deeply unsettling web to untangle.
Unsettling is the word. We are looking at a world where the traditional boundaries we usually rely on, geographic borders, economic firewalls, even ideological lines, they're becoming incredibly porous.
Right.
A sudden shock in one system doesn't just stay contained over there anymore. It instantly destabilizes everything around it.
Exactly. So to give you a sense of our journey today, we're going to start right at the epicenter of a global energy war.
The big one.
Yep. We will trace how that very specific panic is short-circuiting India's domestic supply chains and basically forcing state governments into emergency survival mode.
Which is intense.
Totally. And from there, we'll wade into the fierce political battles over identity, legacy, and human rights happening right now across the country.
We'll also contrast India's massive utopian dreams of artificial intelligence with some really stark, tragic realities happening on the ground.
Yeah, that part is heavy. And finally, we'll end up in Africa looking at a massive high-stakes standoff at the World Trade Organization. It is a massive amount of ground to cover.
But every single piece connects. The connectivity is the whole story here.
Right.
And to understand the downstream effects, we have to start at the source of the earthquake. The geopolitical crisis unfolding in the Middle East right now is basically setting the baseline for everything else we're going to discuss today.
So let's unpack the ticking time bomb in West Asia. Our sources are detailing this severe, incredibly rapid escalation between the United States and Iran.
Yeah, it's a 3-week-old conflict now, and it has already claimed over 2,000 lives.
2,000.
And the escalation ladder is being climbed at a terrifying speed. According to the reports, U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a strict 48-hour ultimatum.
And he's threatened to strike Iran's electricity grid, right?
Exactly. We have U.S. Marines actively moving toward the region right now. We are seeing air raid sirens blaring in Israel after Iranian missile attacks actually hit the cities of Arad and Dimona.
Wait, Dimona? Isn't that?
Yes. The inclusion of Dimona as a target is particularly alarming. For anyone following regional security, Dimona is highly sensitive because it's the site of Israel's primary nuclear facility.
Oh, wow. So striking anywhere near that location is just a massive provocation.
Absolutely. But what is truly terrifying the global community right now is Iran's stated strategy for retaliation.
Right, the spokesman's comments.
Yeah, Iranian military spokesman Ibrahim Zulfikari made a very specific, chilling statement. He said that if Tehran's energy facilities are hit, They will target all U.S. and allied-linked energy, IT, and desalination systems in the Gulf.
That last word is the one that makes everyone just freeze. Desalination.
Yeah.
I mean, the industrial process of taking the salt out of ocean water so human beings can actually drink it. Why is threatening a water plant considered such an apocalyptic move in this specific region?
Because for countries in the Gulf, desalination isn't just like a supplementary water source or a luxury. It is the absolute foundation of biological survival.
Right.
Let's look at the geography. The Gulf states are largely arid deserts. They have practically no freshwater rivers or significant natural aquifers.
So where do they get their water?
Bahrain and Qatar rely almost entirely on desalination for their municipal water supply. The UAE and Saudi Arabia get the vast majority of their drinking water from these massive, incredibly energy-intensive plants right along the coast.
I want you, the listener, to really imagine that for a second. Think about waking up tomorrow morning, turning on your kitchen tap, and knowing that your entire country has maybe a few days of water reserves left.
Right.
And the factories that make the water have literally just been bombed.
Exactly. It is a strategic nightmare. You are essentially weaponizing thirst. These desalination plants use a process called reverse osmosis, which pushes seawater through semi-permeable membranes at extremely high pressure. It requires a massive, uninterrupted flow of electricity.
So if the grid goes down,
If you bomb the power grid, or if you bomb the delicate intake pipes of the plants themselves, you instantly render a modern metropolis like Dubai or Doha completely uninhabitable.
that's terrifying. It bypasses military infrastructure and goes straight for civilian survival.
It does. And the rhetoric is matching the severity of the threat. The Iranian parliament speaker, Mohammad Baker Kalibaf, is warning that Middle East infrastructure could be, quote, irreversibly destroyed.
And the Revolutionary Guards have actually declared that the Strait of Hormuz is going to remain closed until Iran's damaged power plants are rebuilt.
Which is a massive escalation on its own.
Yeah, for anyone who might need a quick geography or economics refresher, the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a regular waterway. It is essentially the jugular vein of the global energy market.
That is no exaggeration. It's a narrow choke point right between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. At its narrowest, it is only about 21 miles wide.
Just 21 miles.
Right. And a fifth of the world's global oil consumption, plus a massive chunk of its liquefied natural gas LNG, passes through that tiny sliver of water.
And when you close a jugular vein, the body panics. The global markets are literally having a heart attack right now.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources indicate that European gas prices have already surged by up to 35%. Oil prices are hitting near 4-year highs.
If you look at the shipping data right now, it shows that most massive oil tankers are just sheltering in place. They're dropping anchor, absolutely terrified to move.
Although, interestingly, our sources mention a few Indian and Pakistani vessels are reportedly trying to quietly negotiate safe passage.
Which really speaks to the sheer desperation of energy-dependent nations. But the insurance mechanics of this are fascinating and also crippling. Well, when a waterway like Hormuz is effectively declared a war zone, marine insurance premiums for these multi-million-dollar vessels, which are carrying billion-dollar cargoes, they skyrocket to a point where the journey becomes economically unviable. So the ships just stop, the oil stops, the gas stops.
It is a complete and total logjam, and the political ramifications are rippling outward too. You have Pope Leo publicly urging an end to the conflict.
Right.
You have a Reuters Ipsos poll showing that most Americans actually disapprove of the U.S. strikes on Iran.
Which turns this into a massive domestic political risk for President Trump heading into the November congressional elections.
Exactly. And here is where we see the absolute bizarre nature of the butterfly effect. Let's look at one of the most unexpected casualties of this global energy panic. We have to talk about the Pakistan Super League.
The PSL, Pakistan's premier domestic T20 cricket tournament. It is a massive cultural and commercial event for the country.
Right. And our sources are telling us that the PSL, which is scheduled to start on March 26th, is being forced into a drastic compromise. They are going to play the tournament entirely behind closed doors.
Empty stadiums, no fans.
Furthermore, they had to slash their footprint, reducing their venues from 6 different cities down to just 2, Lahore and Karachi.
And the reason isn't a pandemic or a local security threat. It is directly linked to the oil crisis caused by this West Asia conflict.
It is a stunning illustration of how macro-level geopolitical shocks filter down into cultural realities. But how does a missile threat in the Gulf actually empty a cricket stadium in Multan? Walk us through that mechanical connection.
Think about the logistical footprint of a major sports league. Moving an international cricket tournament requires an immense continuous supply of fuel.
Right, buses, flights.
Exactly. You are talking about fleets of buses for the players, the support staff, and the massive security convoys required in Pakistan. You are talking about diesel generators for the broadcast trucks that beam the high-definition signal around the world.
Oh, the broadcast trucks. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and commercial flights moving thousands of fans between cities. When the Strait of Hormuz logjam severely restricts Pakistan's fuel imports, the state has to ration.
That makes sense.
You cannot justify burning scarce national fuel reserves to move cricket teams around the country when you desperately need that fuel to keep hospitals running and food delivery trucks moving.
Wow.
So the PCB has to collapse the tournament into just 2 cities and eliminate the massive logistical burden of managing live crowds.
It makes total logical sense when you break it down like that. But there is a secondary drama unfolding here within the cricketing world, isn't there? Because while the PSL is dealing with this logistical nightmare, they are also bleeding their star players.
Yes, the commercial pressure is mounting simultaneously. Pakistan Cricket Board Chairman Mohsin Naqvi is reportedly furious.
I bet.
He is actively threatening legal action against international players who are pulling out of the PSL at the last minute.
And we are seeing some big names jump ship. Sri Lanka's Dasun Shanaka, Zimbabwe's Blessing Mizarabani, they are quitting their PSL contracts to go sign with the Indian Premier League, the IPL.
Which happens to start just 2 days after the PSL.
Right. And Nafi is waving the rule book, bringing up past examples like Corbin Bosch, who was slapped with a 1-year ban after switching to the Mumbai Indians. Naki is making it clear the PCB will enforce its punitive rules.
What we're observing here is the brutal intersection of commercial gravity and regional instability.
Yeah.
Naki is publicly stressing that the schedule clash with the IPL isn't the main reason for the player exodus. He notes that some players have pulled out citing personal reasons or minor injuries, and he insists the PSL still retains immense pull for overseas talent.
But you have to look at the underlying financial reality. The IPL is a financial behemoth. The contracts offered there dwarf almost any other domestic league in the world.
They really do.
So I have to push back on the official narrative here. Let's look at the sequence of events. The Gulf conflict causes an oil crisis. The oil crisis causes a logistics failure. The logistics failure forces the PSL behind closed doors. I understand the cause and effect.
Okay.
But I have to ask, is the PCB genuinely forcing this tournament into empty stadiums strictly out of logistical necessity? Or is there a chance they're looking at an embarrassing situation, star players fleeing to a rival league across the border, potential for embarrassingly low turnout, and realizing that a very real global conflict provides a highly convenient cover story?
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's much easier to say, we had to close the stadiums because of a war, rather than we couldn't fill the stadiums because the IPL poached our best talent.
That is a highly cynical, but honestly incredibly astute way to look at it. In reality, it is almost certainly a convergence of both factors.
Right.
The fuel shortage is an undeniable physical constraint. You simply cannot securely move high-profile international athletes if your transportation infrastructure is paralyzed.
That threat is real.
However, the overlapping schedules of the PSL and the IPL create immense commercial friction. When a player like Shanaka abandons the Lahore Qalandars to join the IPL, or Muzarabani heads to the Kolkata Knight Riders, it exposes the vulnerability of the PSL's financial model.
Exactly.
Blaming regional instability might offer a convenient narrative shield, but the PCB's threat of legal action reveals their true anxiety. They are terrified of their league losing its integrity and value against the overwhelming financial tide of the IPL.
It is a massive headache for the PCB, blending sports, money, and war. But let's follow those shockwaves across the border into India, because these aren't just abstract global events or scheduling headaches for sports executives.
No, not at all.
This energy panic is directly threatening the resources that keep the Indian economy and the Indian population alive.
This is where we see the Indian government aggressively shifting from observation into crisis management mode.
Exactly. Our sources outline a high-level emergency meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security, the CCS. This was chaired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And the focus of this meeting was explicitly clear: protecting consumer and industry interests amidst the chaos in West Asia. For those who might not know, The CCS is the apex body in the Indian government for dealing with defense and national security matters.
When they convene with this level of urgency, it means the threat is systemic.
Definitely.
They are looking at the short, medium, and long-term implications, especially with the Strait of Hormuz effectively choked off and Tehran's missile attacks severely damaging Qatar's energy infrastructure.
So if we break down the specific threats the CCS is evaluating, it paints a very stark picture of India's vulnerabilities. They are primarily focused on three critical pressure points.
Let's hear them.
First, natural gas imports, which are heavily reliant on that Gulf route. Second, anticipating the peak summer electricity demand, which requires a massive buildup of coal inventories right now, especially if natural gas supplies are suddenly constrained.
And the third?
And third, and this is perhaps the most critical, the availability of fertilizer as we approach the Kharif agricultural season.
Yeah, that is huge. So what does a nation of 1.4 billion people do when the global supply chain goes into cardiac arrest?
Well, the Prime Minister directed the formation of a dedicated group of ministers alongside a parallel group of top secretaries to coordinate what they are calling a whole-of-government approach.
A whole-of-government approach.
Right. They want sector-specific teams working around the clock to ensure uninterrupted access to essential commodities. They are putting a massive, urgent emphasis on diversifying import sources, scrambling to find new places to buy fertilizers, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and petrochemicals.
We really need to pause and focus on that word. Fertilizer.
Okay, let's do it.
It sounds like an agricultural footnote, right? Something you buy at a garden center. But in the context of global geopolitics, it is the hidden linchpin of this entire crisis for India.
Why is that? Connect the dots for the listener between a missile in the Gulf and a bag of fertilizer in Punjab.
It fundamentally comes down to chemistry and food security. Modern agriculture relies heavily on nitrogen-based fertilizers, primarily urea. To synthesize urea, you need the Haber-Bosch process, which requires an immense amount of natural gas as a feedstock to produce ammonia.
Ah, there's the natural gas connection.
Exactly. If the natural gas from the Middle East stops flowing, the domestic fertilizer plants in India cannot produce urea. If you cannot produce or import adequate fertilizer right before the Kharif season, which is the monsoon crop, the absolute backbone of India's agricultural output, your crop yields will plummet.
And if crop yields plummet?
If crop yields plummet in a country of 1.4 billion people, you aren't just looking at an economic dip. You face immediate domestic food shortages, massive food inflation, and profound social distress.
That's terrifying.
It is. The fact that the CCS specifically noted that India's recent efforts to build up fertilizer stocks will help safeguard food security shows that they are acutely aware of this terrifying vulnerability.
Right.
They are scrambling to secure alternative suppliers because the turbulence in the global LNG market directly threatens the food on the table for over 1 billion people.
That is the macro level, the whole of government, national security level. But let's zoom in.
Yeah.
Let's look at how this plays out on the ground, at the micro level, in a state like Maharashtra. Because this is where sweeping federal policy collides with everyday survival.
And it gets complicated fast.
Very. The sources show that the Maharashtra government, specifically the State Food and Civil Supplies Minister Chhagan Bhujbal, just announced a drastic move. They are raising their commercial LPG supply quota to 50% of pre-crisis norms.
The crucial context here is the friction with the central government. The center had previously mandated a strict cap of 30% to conserve national reserves during this crisis.
Right. So Maharashtra is actively pushing back against a federal conservation mandate. Think of this like a household trying to survive a brutal winter.
I like this analogy.
The central government, acting as the cautious parent, says, we only have a few logs left for the fire. Everyone can only use 30% of their normal heat so we don't freeze next month. But Maharashtra, acting as the local breadwinner, says, if we only use 30% of our heat today, our local economy dies of hypothermia right now.
Exactly.
They push back hard, and after securing a new director from the Union Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Maharashtra expanded that quota from 30% to 50%.
It perfectly illustrates the intense tension between central, long-term conservation strategies and state-level, immediate economic survival. Where is this extra 20% allocation actually going?
It's being pumped directly into the hospitality and food processing sectors. It's going to hotels, restaurants, the bars, industrial canteens, and the dairy sector.
Okay.
Crucially, it is also covering subsidized canteens and community kitchens that serve migrant workers and lower-income populations. They are basically performing triage, trying to keep the essential food service operations from entirely collapsing.
Right, because if people can't eat, everything stops.
Exactly. But Pushbal knows this is a temporary Band-Aid. He is actively telling business owners they need to start registering for piped natural gas, or PNG, as a long-term transition.
Yeah.
And the state is furiously streamlining kerosene licenses. They are allowing automatic renewals without fees, letting people transfer licenses to their heirs, and letting fair price shop operators become authorized kerosene dealers just to get alternative fuels into people's hands.
It is a frantic scramble to keep the local economic engine from seizing up.
But taking that a step further, I have to ask you, can you really whole of government your way out of a global supply chokehold?
What do you mean?
I mean, is telling local Dubas to switch to PNG just kicking the can down the road? Think about it. If the physical natural gas isn't making it through the Strait of Hormuz, what does it matter if the restaurant has a cylinder in the back or a pipe in the wall? The fuel simply isn't there.
That is the fundamental, inescapable vulnerability of importing energy. Diversification of sources and transitioning from cylinders to piped gas are smart long-term strategies, sure, but they take years, often decades, of infrastructure development.
Exactly.
When you have a sudden acute shock, like the bombing of a grid in West Asia, you cannot innovate your way out of the immediate shortfall. All you can do is manage the deficit.
Right.
The push for PNG registration and the streamlining of kerosene licenses isn't about conjuring new fuel out of thin air. It is about localized rationing. It's about removing bureaucratic friction so that whatever tiny amount of fuel is available gets directed to the most critical sectors as efficiently as possible.
So it's triage.
Absolute triage. The center is trying to build a macroeconomic shield, but state governments like Maharashtra are in the trenches, engaged in localized triage, trying to prevent immediate economic collapse at the street level.
So Maharashtra is trying to manage a literal fuel deficit, but if we look at a state like Himachal Pradesh, they are battling a completely different kind of deficit, a staggering financial one that threatens their very ability to govern.
This is a fascinating pivot, moving from geopolitical economics to domestic fiscal realities. The contrast between how different Indian states are managing their resources right now is jarring.
Let's talk about Himachal Pradesh's fiscal cliff. The numbers coming out of our sources are just breathtaking. The state debt has officially surpassed 1 lakh crore rupees.
That is an astronomical figure for a state of that size.
It is. The situation is so dire that Chief Minister Sukhvinder Singh Sukhru made an unprecedented announcement. He is deferring 50% of his own salary for 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. The Deputy Chief Minister and cabinet ministers are taking a 30% hit. MLAs and various political appointees are deferring 20% of their pay. They have even gone so far as to urge the state high court to consider voluntary salary deferments of up to 30% for judges.
When a sitting government is publicly asking its judiciary to voluntarily take a pay cut, you are looking at a profound indicator of fiscal distress.
Seriously.
Chief Minister Suku attributes a massive portion of this strain to the central government's discontinuation of the revenue deficit grant.
Walk the listener through that. What is a revenue deficit grant, and why does losing it cause a state to basically fall off a cliff?
To understand this, you have to understand the architecture of Indian federalism. States have massive expenditure responsibilities. They run the police, the schools, the local health care, the agricultural support.
Right.
But they often lack the full taxing authority to generate the revenue needed to cover those exact costs. The central government collects the bulk of major taxes and then redistributes them.
Okay, got it.
The revenue deficit grant is essentially a mechanism recommended by the Finance Commission to help states that have a structural gap between what they earn and what they must spend to maintain basic services.
Think of it like a monthly allowance meant to keep you afloat.
Precisely. Suku claims the discontinuation of this grant caused a sudden annual loss of 8,000 to 10,000 crore rupees.
That's a massive hole in the budget.
Huge. When you suddenly remove that foundational pillar of funding, but the state's expenses remain the same, the state is forced to borrow heavily just to keep the lights on.
But here is the contradiction, and this is where it gets incredibly paradoxical. Because despite this crushing existential debt, the Himachal Pradesh government just presented a 54,928 crore rupee budget that is heavily, almost aggressively focused on welfare spending.
They're essentially expanding their commitments while their bank account is draining.
Exactly. They are rolling out 1,500 rupees in monthly financial assistance for 1 lakh women. They are offering 300 units of free electricity for poor households.
And the agricultural subsidies.
Oh, they significantly hiked the minimum support price, the MSP, for cow milk to 61 rupees a liter and buffalo milk to 71 rupees. They increased the MSPs for turmeric and ginger, too.
And how are they proposing to pay for these new liabilities, given the 1 lakh core deficit?
Well, to generate some fractional revenue, they are proposing a new orphan and widow cess on petrol and diesel, which will be capped at 5 rupees a liter.
I can imagine the opposition had something to say about that.
Oh, absolutely. The opposition BJP is tearing into this. They are calling it a back gear document, essentially accusing the government of inflating their revenue factors and hiding the true depth of the crisis.
Interesting.
So I have to ask you, how does a government logically justify hiking the purchase price of cow milk and giving away free electricity while simultaneously begging the high court judges to take a voluntary pay cut? Are we just looking at credit card governance, where a state maxes out a new card just to pay the minimum balance on the old one?
Credit card governance is an incredibly apt analogy. It highlights the brutal dilemma of democratic politics, particularly in developing economies. The mandate to govern is very often won on the promise of welfare. In a rural agrarian economy, like Himachal Pradesh, things like milk procurement prices and electricity subsidies aren't just perks, they're economic lifelines for thousands of families.
Right, they depend on it.
If a government halts those welfare programs to balance the budget, they risk immediate catastrophic political annihilation at the polls. So they borrow against the future to maintain social stability and political viability in the present.
It is a terrifying tightrope walk between fiscal prudence and political survival.
It really is.
Speaking of political survival, let's contrast that precarious situation in Himachal with a milestone of absolute national stability. Our sources highlight a massive moment in Indian political history. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has officially become India's longest-serving head of government.
He surpassed the previous record held by former Sikkim Chief Minister Pawan Kumar Chanling.
Right. Chanling held the record at 8,930 days. As of Sunday, Modi's cumulative tenure reached 8,931 days.
That is an astonishing span of continuous executive power.
It really is. The sources recount his trajectory, which started back in 2001 when he took over as the chief minister of Gujarat. And the context of his early days in Gujarat is crucial. He inherited a state reeling from a devastating earthquake, severe cyclones, and droughts.
Yeah, a really tough starting point.
The narrative his party built over the next decade was one of transforming a disaster zone into a powerhouse of good governance and economic growth.
And that specific track record in Gujarat became the absolute foundation of his national appeal leading up to the massive 2014 general election victory.
And he has maintained that momentum. He is the first prime minister born after independence to secure 3 consecutive majorities, 2014, 2019, and 2024.
Quite a legacy.
He reflected on the 8,931-day milestone by citing his mother's foundational advice to him: work for the poor and never accept a bribe.
And the political reactions.
Predictably massive. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh praised his nation-first governance. Gujarat Deputy Chief Minister Harsh Sanghavi framed the achievement by saying Modi gave up a family and gave up comfort to serve the nation over those 24 years.
Right.
Modi himself used the occasion to highlight his administration's claims of lifting over 25 crore people out of poverty, and he reiterated his intense focus on Nari Shakti, women's power, U.S Shakti, youth power, and farmers as the central pillars of his vision for a Viksit Bharat, or a fully developed India.
What is important to analyze here isn't just the sheer number of days, but the political narrative that is being cemented by that longevity.
Tell me more about that.
It is a narrative of intense centralization, predictability, and enduring stability. In a world defined by the exact kind of terrifying volatility we just discussed, energy grids threatened by missiles, global supply chains failing, the political brand being projected by the Prime Minister is one of an unshakable, permanent anchor.
Which provides a fascinating stark contrast to the political landscape in West Bengal.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in Bengal, the dominant political narrative isn't about centralized, quiet stability. It is about fierce, combative, localized crisis management.
Let's delve into the Bengal election landscape, because it is one of the most complex political theaters in the country.
Our sources feature a very candid interview with TMC Rajya Sabha MP Sagrika Ghose, And she's making a bold, somewhat counterintuitive claim. She argues that the fallout from the status of identity, the SIR exercise, has essentially wiped out any localized anti-incumbency against the Trinamool Congress ahead of the upcoming assembly elections.
The SAR exercise clearly struck a very deep, sensitive nerve in the state. For the listener, the SAR was intended to be a bureaucratic mechanism to verify citizenship and identify undocumented immigrants.
Imagine living in a state with a highly complex, historically porous border, and suddenly the government mandates a list that decides if you legally belong there.
It creates a lot of anxiety.
Ghost claims the BJP attempted to weaponize this SR process to unseat Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee by rallying voters against alleged infiltrators. But, according to Ghost, it spectacularly backfired.
Why did it backfire?
Because the clumsy execution of the exercise ended up casting official doubt on the citizenship of some of the most highly respected, iconic Bengali figures alive.
The list of names flagged by the process was astounding, wasn't it?
We are talking about Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, former Chief Secretary Nandini Chakraborty, State Minister Sashi Panja, even international cricketer Richa Ghosh.
Wow.
To have a Nobel laureate's citizenship questioned by a bureaucratic algorithm created a massive uproar. Ghosh argues this exposed a gross mistake by the BJP. She claims it created a massive anti-BJP wave, prompting everyday citizens to look at this list of Bengali icons and ask, where are the actual infiltrators you've been talking about all these years?
This is a textbook, fascinating example of how a rigid national policy can inadvertently consolidate regional identity. By questioning the citizenship of a figure like Amartya Sen, who is deeply intertwined with Bengali intellectual pride, the narrative instantly shifted. It was no longer viewed as a dry administrative verification process. It was perceived as a direct, insulting assault on Bengali culture and identity by an external force.
And Ghosh leans hard into this narrative of Mamata Banerjee as the ultimate regional protector. She calls Banerjee a rare South Asian phenomenon, a 24/7 leader who resolves crises purely through her own grit without the backing of a political dynasty or mentorship.
What about local dissatisfaction, though?
Well, Ghosh does acknowledge there was some localized dissatisfaction with lower-level TMC leaders, which is likely why the party aggressively dropped 74 sitting MLAs from their candidate list to clean house, but she insists there is zero discontent against Banerjee herself.
Right.
She paints the TMC as the ultimate women-first party, pointing to the Aparhita bill.
The Aparhita bill is a crucial piece of context here. It was recently passed by the West Bengal State Assembly in the wake of severe public outrage over violence against women, specifically the tragic RG Car Hospital incident.
Right, that was a huge national story.
The bill mandates incredibly stringent anti-rape measures, including capital punishment for certain offenses. Ghosh is citing this legislative action as proof that the TMC responds forcefully to the demands of female voters.
And she also tackles the narrative of disinformation, framing it as an attack on the state itself. She calls it an architecture of lies, specifically targeting Bengal.
She mentions the migrant issues, right?
Yeah, she points to recent incidents of harassment against Bengali-speaking migrants in other parts of the country and a general ignorance about Bangla dialects as proof of a deep-seated anti-Bengal stance by the BJP. She essentially concludes that the chaos of the HESAR, combined with what she calls an underprepared election commission, have actually galvanized the TMC's base and strengthened their position.
So if we look at the overarching themes of this section, we see two entirely different, highly effective approaches to political longevity.
Break that down for us.
On one hand, you have the Prime Minister's 24-year narrative built on projecting national stability, massive development goals, and a unified Viksit Bharat. On the other, you have Mamata Banerjee's fiercely regional persona, the ultimate street fighter and protector of unique Bengali identity against what she frames as an overbearing, culturally insensitive central authority.
That friction over identity in Bengal brings us right to the doorstep of a much broader conflict, because we are seeing deeply contentious, fundamental fights over political legacy, personal identity, and the very definition of human rights happening right now across multiple spheres. Let's move our focus to the northeast, to Assam.
The political landscape in Assam seems to be undergoing a profound identity crisis of its own, blurring the lines of what political parties actually represent.
Identity crisis is exactly the right phrase. We have State Congress Chief and Lok Sabha MP Gaurav Gogoi making a striking, almost philosophical assertion ahead of the April 9 Assam Assembly election. He is flat out declaring to the media that the BJP no longer exists in Assam.
That is quite a bold claim, considering that the BJP, led by Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma, is currently sitting in power with a strong mandate. How does Gogoi justify saying they don't exist?
This is a classic ship of Theseus scenario. You know the old thought experiment, if you have a wooden ship and over the years you replace every single rotting plank with a new piece of wood, is it still fundamentally the same ship?
Right, the Philosophy 101 question.
Gogoi is basically arguing that the Assam BJP is the ship of Theseus. He states that Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma is merely leading a faction of Congress defectors who are temporarily wearing a BJP label.
I see.
Gogoi points out that if you walk into the BJP's state headquarters, Vajpayee Bhawan, the leaders sitting there making the decisions are the exact same individuals who were allegedly responsible for damaging the image of the previous Tarun Gogoi-led Congress government.
It highlights the incredibly porous, shifting nature of ideological boundaries in Indian state politics, often facilitated by the complex mechanics of the anti-defection laws.
It really does.
Our sources note that the Congress Party in Assam has suffered massive high-profile defections recently. Leaders like former state chief Bhupen Bora and Lok Sabha MP Pradyut Bordoloi have jumped ship to join the BJP, often following deep disagreements with Gogoi's leadership style.
And Gogoi is leaning into this framing. He is telling voters that this election isn't actually a battle between the BJP and the Congress. He frames it as a civil war. The Congress, led by Tarun Gogoi, meaning his faction, which he claims is focused on pure ideals and fresh faces, versus the Congress led by Himanta Biswa Sarma, meaning the defectors who he says are entirely devoid of ideology and merely seeking ministerial power.
So the fundamental question being asked in Assam is, what is a political party?
Right. If a political party replaces almost all of its regional leadership with defectors from the exact opposition they spent years campaigning against, does that party retain its original ideological soul? Or does it simply become a franchise shell, operating the machinery of the state while adopting the political culture of the people who just moved in?
It is a brilliant question that gets to the heart of electoral pragmatism versus ideological purity. But this intense debate over the definition of identity isn't just happening in the realm of electoral politics and party logos.
Where else is it happening?
It is happening right now in the legal and human rights arena as well, with incredibly profound personal implications for thousands of citizens.
Yes, and this is a critical, highly sensitive pivot. We need to look at a fierce, deeply consequential debate over the newly introduced Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Amendment Bill 2026. Now, because this touches on intense political and social divides, we are going to present the arguments exactly as they are laid out in the parliamentary and activist sources without taking any sides, so you can clearly understand the mechanics of the conflict.
The central political figure opposing the bill in our sources is Congress MP Shashi Tharoor. He has released a sharp, detailed critique of the proposed legislation, categorizing it as deeply regressive.
Let's break down exactly what Tharoor is arguing, because it hinges on a very specific legal history. He states that this new 2026 bill undermines constitutional protections and directly reverses the rights established by the landmark 2014 ANELSA Supreme Court judgment.
For the listener, the 2014 ANELSA judgment was a global milestone. It fundamentally ruled that gender identity is a matter of psychological self-perception, not biological testing. It gave transgender individuals the constitutional right to self-identify their gender.
Exactly. And Tharoor's primary alarm is over the government's removal of Section 4.2 of the previous 2019 Act.
Section 4.2 was the vital provision that codified that ANELSA ruling into law. It guaranteed the right to a self-perceived gender identity without requiring medical proof.
Right. Tharoor notes that the new 2026 amendments completely scrap that principle of self-perception. In its place, the bill introduces mandatory medical board verification and bureaucratic certification.
Which is a huge shift.
Let's think about what that means mechanically. Tharoor argues this effectively rips the authority to determine a person's identity away from the individual's own mind and body and hands that authority over to a state-appointed panel of doctors and bureaucrats. He argues this is a profound intrusion upon human dignity, bodily autonomy, and personal liberty.
He also raises significant concerns about how the bill legally defines who even qualifies as transgender, correct?
Yes, the definitions are highly contested. Tharoor warns that the text of the bill drastically narrows the definition of a transgender person. He argues it reduces complex human identity to strict biological markers or very limited sociocultural
Yeah,
categories.
the consequence of that.
He warns this could legally erase and exclude trans men, trans women, and non-binary individuals who do not fit the medical board's rigid criteria. Furthermore, he points out a massive privacy concern.
Privacy regarding medical procedures.
Exactly. I want the listener to think about their own medical records for a second. Imagine the government mandating that you report highly sensitive private surgeries to a state registry.
That would make anyone uncomfortable.
Tharoor points out that new provisions in this bill require the reporting of gender-affirming surgeries to the state. He argues this could expose an already marginalized community to severe social stigma, discrimination, and unwarranted state surveillance. He is urgently demanding that the bill be sent to a parliamentary standing committee for rigorous, multi-party scrutiny.
And we must look at the government's stated justification for introducing these strict amendments in the first place.
The government, via the Union Minister for Social Justice and Empowerment, Virendra Kumar, who introduced the bill, argues that these amendments are an administrative necessity. They argue the medical boards are required to ensure that state-sponsored welfare benefits, reservations, and protections reach real beneficiaries and are not exploited by bad actors making false claims of identity.
Tharoor counters that administrative argument by stating that narrowing the eligibility criteria so drastically will actually exclude the genuine beneficiaries the state claims to want to help. He argues the legislation shifts the state's posture from one of protection to one of hostile gatekeeping.
And the activist community has responded too, right?
Yes, the transgender activist community has erupted in opposition. They argue they were completely bypassing the drafting process and that prioritizing state surveillance over individual identity destroys the inclusive intent of the original Nyasa judgment.
If we step back and analyze the philosophical shift happening here, it is monumental.
It is. Moving from a legal model of self-determination back to a model of bureaucratic gatekeeping and mandatory medical verification represents a fundamental reconceptualization of the social contract.
How so?
It asks the question, who has the final say over the reality of your existence, you or the state? It highlights the tension between the state's desire for administrative legibility, the need to categorize citizens neatly into boxes for welfare distribution, and the individual's right to a complex, self-determined existence.
And you see this incredible, almost dizzying tension all over India right now. On one hand, we're debating the most fundamental, cutting-edge philosophies of human rights and bodily autonomy. And on the other hand, we are trying to leapfrog entirely into a sci-fi future, even as tragic, basic systemic failures continue to claim lives on the ground. Which leads us perfectly into the stark contrast of our next topic.
The duality of India's development model is always jarring, but the sources we are looking at today present a contrast that gives you absolute whiplash.
Let's start by looking at the digital penthouse being promised. We have Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister N. Chandrababu Naidu speaking at the massive South Asia Learning Summit in Hyderabad.
Oh, this was quite the speech.
It was. He is painting a utopian, technology-driven vision for his state that sounds like it was pulled from a futuristic novel. He is promising the public that within a single year, the citizens of Andhra Pradesh will have access to an AI doctor, an AI agronomist, and an AI tutor.
He is framing this as the ultimate digital transformation. He pointed to his administration's real-time governance system, a massive data command center, as a model for monitoring welfare delivery. He promised that these AI services would be integrated with digital health cards for every single citizen.
Think about the pitch. You are a farmer in a remote village, and instead of waiting weeks for a human expert to visit your failing crops, you hold up your smartphone, the AI agronomist scans the leaves, diagnoses the blight, and instantly prescribes the exact fertilizer mix.
That sounds amazing.
And his economic vision is equally aggressive. He wants to push the state's growth rate from a healthy 12% up to an explosive 15%. He reiterated his long-held dream of transforming the capital, Amaravati, into Hyderabad Plus.
And he has the history to back up those kinds of tech dreams.
Right. He reminded the audience of his historical track record, how he helped build Hyderabad into a global tech hub by developing HI Tech City and bringing in global heavyweights like Bill Gates and Tony Blair back in the 90s.
So he's selling a return to form.
Exactly. He is claiming that the current TDP Jana Sena BJP political alliance has restored that momentum after years of stagnation under the previous government. He is talking about green hydrogen, quantum computing, space tech, drones. It is a vision of an entirely frictionless, AI-optimized future.
It is the ultimate expression of the technological leapfrogging strategy. It relies on the premise that developing nations don't have to suffer through the slow, linear path of 20th century industrialization.
They can just skip ahead.
Right. They can simply parachute the bleeding edge of 21st century technology directly into villages to solve systemic poverty and inefficiency.
But we have to look at the ground floor. We have to look at what happens when the shiny technology is laid over a foundation where the absolute basics of regulatory enforcement have completely failed.
Because the reality is often very different.
Because also in Andhra Pradesh, right now, in the East Godavari district, a horrifying preventable tragedy has just unfolded. The death toll in a suspected milk adulteration case has climbed to 16.
16 people dead simply from drinking their morning milk. It is a staggering human tragedy.
The details are incredibly grim, and we need to understand the mechanics of how this happens. The laboratory findings confirm that the victims suffered massive multi-organ failure, which was triggered by acute renal failure. Their kidneys simply shut down.
And why did their kidneys shut down?
Because the milk they consumed was laced with ethylene glycol.
Ethylene glycol is a highly toxic industrial chemical, most commonly used as antifreeze in car radiators.
How does antifreeze get into a village milk supply? This isn't usually a targeted poisoning. It is the dark side of an unregulated, hyper-competitive, informal economy.
It's a terrifying consequence of cost-cutting.
Sometimes, unscrupulous vendors use industrial chemicals to artificially inflate the fat content or density of watered-down milk to cheat the testing meters at the dairy co-ops. Sometimes it's used as a cheap, illegal solvent in synthetic milk.
And how did they trace it back?
The clusters of patients started reporting severe symptoms in mid-February in places like Chhattisgarh and Surapanagar. How do you trace a poison across 100 different families? The state had to deploy rapid response teams going door to door, asking what people ate when they fell ill, drawing blood, until they traced it back to a single dairy unit in Narasapuram village that supplied over 100 families.
The state's response mechanisms eventually kicked in. You had epidemiological investigations, emergency medical camps established, the Food Safety Department finally inspecting the unit. The police arrested the vendor under Section 194 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita.
Section 194 deals specifically with the adulteration of food or drink intended for sale, making it noxious or unfit for consumption. But the critical, heartbreaking point here is that all of this impressive state machinery, the rapid response teams, the lab testing, the penal code, was only activated after the poison was already in the system and people were dying.
It is reactive, not proactive. And it's not just rural areas where fundamental enforcement is failing while technology watches. Let's look at a completely different kind of failure in highly urbanized Bengaluru.
This story is the perfect juxtaposition. We have a viral video of a white Lamborghini supercar performing incredibly dangerous, high-speed drifting stunts right at the Anil Kumbal Circle in the heart of Bengaluru at 2 a.m.
Okay, sounds like a movie scene.
The city police spring into action. They utilize their massive state-of-the-art surveillance grid, tapping into 50 different CCTV cameras to track the speeding supercar all the way back to the plush Sadashivanagar residence of a man named Ricky Rai.
Who is Ricky Rai?
He happens to be the son of the late, notorious underworld figure Muthappa Rai. The police successfully seized the car.
A triumph of modern surveillance technology. The cameras did exactly what they were designed to do.
But wait. Here is where the system hits a brick wall. The police scan the vehicle's registration number and find that it isn't linked to any owner details in the transport database.
Oh, it's unregistered.
It's a ghost car, a multi-crore asset with no legal owner on paper. They serve Ricky Rai 2 official notices to appear for questioning regarding the reckless driving, and he just ignores them.
He just doesn't show up.
He doesn't show up. And the police are now planning to issue a 3rd notice and maybe escalate it to a court warrant. This is a man who was in the news just 11 months prior when a loyalist allegedly shot at him in his moving car near a farmhouse.
So we are looking at an incredible paradox of state capacity.
That is exactly the friction point. We are building a digital penthouse while the ground floor is literally catching fire.
It's a wild contrast.
I want the listener to really weigh this contradiction. What good is a cutting-edge AI agronomist or an AI doctor on your smartphone if a citizen can be killed in their own home by the local milk vendor adulterating their breakfast with industrial chemicals because basic food inspectors are absent?
Right.
Or, what is the point of a city police force having the technological power to track a supercar across 50 high-definition cameras in the dead of night if they lack the basic institutional teeth to make the driver actually answer a legal summons?
It perfectly encapsulates the duality of modern India. Technology acts as both a savior and a spectator.
Well said.
An AI algorithm can certainly optimize the delivery of a welfare scheme or accurately diagnose a crop disease from a photo, but technology cannot substitute for institutional accountability and ground-level regulatory enforcement.
Exactly.
The tragedy in East Godavari is a catastrophic failure of basic food safety standards, something no AI can retroactively fix once the poison is ingested. The Lamborghini incident highlights how high-end surveillance can effortlessly identify a crime, but elite impunity can still short-circuit the legal process. You simply cannot leapfrog the necessity of the rule of law.
It is an incredible, almost overwhelming complexity to manage. The state is trying to push forward with these advanced, futuristic global ambitions while still fiercely defending basic survival and foundational governance at home.
Right.
And this exact posture managing deep internal contradictions while projecting strength and navigating incredibly complex international systems is exactly how India is operating on the world stage right now.
Which brings us to our final destination today. A massive showdown happening in Africa, where India is taking on the global trading system.
We are heading to the 14th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference taking place in Cameroon. And there is a massive high-stakes standoff happening over something called the Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement, or the IFD.
The IFD. Let's set the scene for the listener. Out of the 166 member nations in the WTO, 128 of them are fully expected to support incorporating this IFD agreement into the official WTO legal framework.
But India, standing shoulder to shoulder with South Africa, is fiercely opposing it. They are blocking the consensus and finding themselves increasingly politically isolated on the floor of the conference.
To understand why India is taking such a hard, unpopular line, we have to understand what the IFD actually does, and more importantly, how it is being passed.
Let's start with the what. The IFD has been in discussion since 2017. It's stated, official goal is to improve investment climates, enhance regulatory transparency, and drastically reduce red tape to help developing countries attract foreign direct investment. Crucially, it claims to do this merely by simplifying administrative procedures, not by forcing countries to liberalize their actual economic policies. It explicitly excludes sensitive issues like market access, investment protection, and government procurement. It even has special, flexible provisions allowing developing countries to implement the rules at their own pace based on their institutional capacity.
So, on paper, it sounds like a totally reasonable, beneficial idea. Cut the red tape, make it easier for money to flow into poor countries.
Right. Think of this like a massive homeowners association. You live in a neighborhood of 166 houses. 128 of your neighbors want to adopt a new, simple rule that just standardizes the paperwork for hiring a painter for your house.
Sure, easy enough.
They aren't telling you what color to paint it or who to hire. They just want everyone to use the same easy form. Why on earth is India bolting the gates, standing in the street, and refusing to let the neighborhood vote happen?
Because India's core objection isn't primarily about the specific content of the IFD. It is about the process and the long-term, highly dangerous strategic implications of allowing that process to occur.
The process.
India argues that adopting the IFD through a plurilateral route, meaning an agreement reached among a willing subset of members rather than all of them, fundamentally undermines the foundational bedrock of the WTO, which is multilateral consensus. The WTO was built on the idea that every single member, no matter how small, has to agree to the rules.
India is aggressively warning that allowing these plurilateral backdoor deals to become official WTO law could fragment the entire institution. They fear it will create a two-tier system dominated by major global economies, allowing them to quietly bypass the concerns of developing countries on critical issues in the future.
And we absolutely cannot ignore the geopolitical subtext lurking beneath the paperwork.
Ah, the subtext.
The sources cite a very pointed report by the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. It highlights a glaring, undeniable statistic. 98 of the 128 nations participating in the IFD are also part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI.
Ah. And there is the geoeconomic Trojan horse.
Exactly. The strategic concern in New Delhi is that by harmonizing investment facilitation rules globally through the back door of the WTO, It indirectly but massively strengthens China's geoeconomic influence.
How does it do that?
It perfectly aligns the regulatory environments across all these BRI-linked economies, many of which are in India's immediate strategic neighborhood. It essentially paves a smooth, standardized, legal highway for Chinese capital to flow globally, further entrenching their economic dominance under the guise of cutting red tape.
But there's also a deeply tactical, immediate layer to India's opposition here. They are using the standoff over the IFD as raw leverage for something much closer to home.
Their own subsidies.
Yes, India is using its veto power to push for a permanent solution on the public stockholding of food grains.
This is where global trade law collides with the survival of the Indian farmer.
Let's explain the mechanics of this because it's vital. Right now, India repeatedly breaches the WTO's strict 10% subsidy cap for agricultural products, specifically rice, in order to maintain its massive domestic food security programs like the public distribution system.
And you might wonder, how does India breach a 10% cap so easily?
Right.
It's because the WTO calculates that 10% based on global reference prices from the years 1986 to 1988.
That is the absurdity of the formula.
It really is.
Imagine someone telling you that your grocery budget today is strictly capped based on what a loaf of bread cost in 1986. It makes no sense.
Right.
Because of this outdated formula, India's vital subsidies to its farmers look illegally massive on paper.
So how have they avoided penalties?
India has been relying on a temporary peace clause negotiated back in 2013 to avoid facing severe legal and economic sanctions from the WTO. But a peace clause is temporary. India wants a permanent fix. They want the rules rewritten to acknowledge the reality of feeding 1 billion people in the 21st century.
And if we connect this all the way back to the very beginning of our conversation today, you see exactly why this issue of food stockholding is an absolute non-negotiable red line for India.
Absolutely.
We started this deep dive talking about a geopolitical energy crisis in the Middle East directly threatening fertilizer supplies, which directly threatens the Kharif crop. If global supply chains are that fragile and can be shattered by a single missile in the Gulf, domestic food security isn't just a quaint economic policy. It is India's ultimate existential geopolitical shield.
They simply cannot afford to let a global trade body in Geneva dictate rules that might compromise their ability to legally subsidize, procure, and stockpile food for 1.4 billion citizens when the world outside is catching fire.
Analysts suggest India might eventually soften its stance on the IFD if and only if they get an ironclad, permanent win on their food stockholding demands. But for now, they're holding the line, arguing that these plurilateral deals threaten the very soul of the WTO.
It is a high-stakes game of three-dimensional chess, played with the food supply of a nation as the ultimate stakes.
It really is.
And that brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's synthesize what we've just unpacked together, because we have covered a staggering amount of ground.
We have. And I hope the underlying architecture of how our modern world operates is a little clearer. We have seen how deeply, intimately, and dangerously the world is wired together.
You have seen how a threat from Donald Trump to a power grid in the Gulf can ripple outward, freeze shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, force a beloved cricket tournament in Pakistan behind closed doors, and ultimately dictate the cooking gas quotas for a small restaurant owner in Maharashtra trying to make a living.
It's incredible when you line it all up.
You've seen how state governments are trapped juggling futuristic sci-fi promises of AI doctors with the crippling realities of massive state debt and heartbreaking preventable tragedies and basic food safety.
Right.
And you've seen how India leverages its massive scale to fight off Chinese regulatory influence at a trade summit in Cameroon, all while fiercely trying to protect the farmers who keep the nation fed.
Every single one of these stories, whether it is the silence of an empty stadium, the legal battle over a transgender person's medical privacy, or the roar of a ghost-registered Lamborghini in Bengaluru, is a vital data point. They're all part of a much larger, unfolding narrative about resilience, vulnerability, and the rapidly shifting nature of power in the 21st century.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought. I want you to mull this over as you go about your day. We've talked a lot today about crises, energy crises, political crises, identity crises.
It's rank crises.
But what is global instability, rapid technological disruption, and fractured supply chains are no longer temporary emergencies that we just have to, get through.
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
What if this constant state of overlapping shockwaves is just the permanent new normal? Are our current political systems, our slow-moving international institutions, and our very definitions of human identity actually equipped to handle the incredibly complex, volatile world we are waking up to tomorrow?
That is the defining question of our era, and the answer will dictate the shape of the coming decades.
Thank you so much for taking the plunge with us today on the Deep Dive. We encourage you to look at tomorrow's headlines through this newly connected lens. Remember that a missile strike in the Middle East and the price of a cup of milk at your local dhaba are much closer than they appear. Until next time, stay curious.